"This is private property. You have no right to do this," I shouted, standing face to face with the HOA representative in her white dress, clipboard clutched to her chest. Behind us, my entire house stood sealed shut, every window and door covered with plywood. My home of 15 years, completely inaccessible, all because I refused to remove my late wife's memorial garden. What this power-hungry HOA president didn't realize was that my brother, a 25-year Navy SEAL veteran, was arriving tomorrow, and he was about to turn their own tactics against them in ways they never anticipated. I'm Robert Jensen, 45, retired high school history teacher. For 15 years, I'd lived peacefully in Oak Ridge Estates, a quiet subdivision where I'd planned to spend my retirement. The modest 2-story home became especially important after my wife Claire passed away 3 years ago from cancer. The native wildflower garden I'd planted along the front walkway was the last project we'd planned together. Her final wish was to create something beautiful that would attract the butterflies she loved watching from her hospice bed. Vanessa Mitchell, early 40s, became our HOA president 6 months ago. Standing before me now in her crisp white dress, this former corporate attorney with steel-rimmed glasses and perpetual expression of contempt had systematically executed what she called community standards modernization. The previous board had been reasonable, mostly retirees who understood the balance between regulations and neighborly respect. Vanessa's approach was different, aggressive, unyielding, and utterly devoid of compromise. "Property values are what build communities," she announced at her first meeting. "Aesthetic harmony is non-negotiable." 3 longtime board members mysteriously resigned within weeks of her election, replaced by people I'd never seen at community functions, all younger professionals with connections to local development companies. Meanwhile, my younger brother Mike, 42, was completing his final mission as a Navy SEAL team commander. After over 20 years in special operations, missions he rarely discussed but were reflected in the quiet intensity of his gaze, he was transitioning to civilian life. We'd planned his 2-week visit for months. I was his only family besides my son and grandson, and he needed time to decompress before deciding his next step. The timing of his arrival would prove more critical than either of us could have imagined. The Tuesday before Mike's arrival, a cream-colored envelope appeared on my door. Inside, a violation notice with a computer-generated image showing my home with a pristine lawn replacing Claire's wildflower garden. Unauthorized vegetation. $100 daily fine until remediation. I requested an immediate meeting with Vanessa. She arrived precisely at 2 p.m., designer sunglasses perched atop her perfectly styled hair, tablet in manicured hands. "Mr. Jensen," she began without preamble, "I appreciate your prompt response to our notification." I explained that the garden contained native species specifically recommended by the County Conservation Office's water-saving program. I showed her the xeriscaping certification we'd received and the small plaque from the Audubon Society recognizing it as a certified wildlife habitat. "Those external programs have no jurisdiction over our covenant," she replied, her voice professionally modulated. "Section 8.2 requires all landscape elements to maintain aesthetic harmony with adjacent properties. But these plants are drought-resistant. We're in year 3 of water restrictions. Environmental concerns, while admirable, don't supersede our community standards," she said, swiping through images on her tablet. "Your neighbors have managed to maintain conventional landscaping within conservation guidelines. This garden was my wife's final project before she died," I said, my voice tightening. "It's a memorial to her." For a moment, something flickered across Vanessa's face, perhaps recognition of the human element in this equation, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Personal circumstances, however difficult, cannot be factored into uniform enforcement," she said. "You have 7 days to remediate before additional citations are issued." The fine grew to $700 in a week. My teacher's pension stretched only so far after Claire's medical bills. I requested a hearing with the full board, only to face a wall of unfamiliar faces seated beside Vanessa, their expressions uniformly unsympathetic. By the end of the month, my violation notices required their own file folder. My mailbox, non-regulation design though it had stood for a decade. The American flag on my porch, improperly displayed despite following proper flag protocol I taught my students for years. The stone path leading to Claire's garden. Unapproved hardscaping. I wasn't alone. Margaret Wilson, 72, widow and original Oak Ridge resident, received citations for her award-winning roses. Tom Richards, retired firefighter, was fined when his garage door remained open for 4 hours while he built a dollhouse for his granddaughter. Eduardo Vasquez found his accessibility ramp for his elderly mother flagged as an unauthorized structural modification. At the monthly HOA meeting, attendance swelled with confused and angry residents. Vanessa remained coolly detached, flanked by 2 men introduced only as compliance consultants. "We're simply enforcing the bylaws you all agreed to when purchasing your homes," she stated as complaints mounted. "If you find these standards burdensome, perhaps Oak Ridge isn't the appropriate community for your needs." That evening, I spread the neighborhood map across my dining table, marking each home with reported violations. A pattern emerged. The citations concentrated in an L-shaped section of the community, primarily affecting older residents on fixed incomes. When I cross-referenced property records online, I discovered something disturbing. 6 homes at the neighborhood entrance had been sold within months to different limited liability companies, all sharing the same registered agent. Mitchell Development Partners. The connection to Vanessa's surname couldn't be coincidental. I began documenting everything meticulously: dates, times, exact wording of violations. Teaching history had instilled the importance of primary sources and chronological documentation. These habits would soon prove invaluable. Saturday had been perfect, blue skies, my grandson Jack winning his championship game with a pitch that made tears form in my eyes. "Just like his grandpa," my son had said as we celebrated with ice cream. After 15 years of teaching other people's children, these moments with my own family were everything. I was still smiling as I turned onto Oak Ridge Drive at 5:30 p.m., mentally planning Mike's arrival tomorrow, the fishing trip, the stories we'd share. The smile died on my face. I slammed the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked. My house, my home of 15 years, was gone. In its place stood a fortress of plywood and condemnation. Every window sealed, the door I'd painted last summer completely covered. A laminated notice stapled centermass like an execution order: property in violation. Access restricted PR section 8.3 of covenant. My heart hammered against my ribs as I parked and rushed across my lawn. There stood Vanessa in her fitted white dress, clipboard clutched against her chest, her expression cold and calculating. We faced each other directly on the walkway, exactly as shown in the thumbnail image, just the 2 of us squaring off with my completely boarded-up house as the backdrop. No security guards or workmen between us, just a direct confrontation. "What the hell have you done to my house?" I shouted, gesturing wildly at the plywood covering every window and door. Vanessa remained perfectly composed, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to my obvious distress. "Mr. Jensen, your continuous violations and failure to pay accumulated fines has resulted in enforcement action as permitted by Section 8.3. This is private property." I stepped closer, my voice rising with each word. "You have absolutely no right to board up someone's home without notice." "According to our records," she replied coolly, consulting her clipboard with a slight smirk, "this property has been deemed uninhabitable due to homeowner neglect and environmental hazards." "Environmental hazards? From native plants recommended by the county? That's absurd and you know it." "The determination has been made," she stated firmly, not backing down despite my proximity. "If you wish to contest this action, you may submit a formal appeal for next month's meeting." Next month? My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Where exactly am I supposed to live until then?" "That's not the HOA's concern," she replied. Then her tone shifted slightly. "However, Meridian Properties is prepared to make a generous offer on your home as is. It would resolve everything immediately." In that moment, the calculated nature of this ambush crystallized. This wasn't random enforcement, this was strategic elimination. I called the police, who arrived shortly after. The officer's expression fell as he reviewed the HOA documents. his conflict evident as he shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but this appears to be a civil matter between you and your homeowners association. The covenant does include enforcement provisions. They've locked me out without notice." I gestured at the boarded windows. "My blood pressure medication is in there. I need it tonight." The officer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Let me call my sergeant." He stepped away, spoke quietly into his radio, then returned with reluctance written across his face. "My sergeant says we can't break the seal without a court order, but he's contacting emergency services to get you temporary medication and a welfare check. It's the most we can do until you get a judge to intervene." As the officer departed, Vanessa approached again, this time with paperwork in hand. "Mr. Jensen, Meridian Properties is prepared to make an offer on your home. They'll waive all accumulated fines as part of the purchase." I glared at her. This was never about community standards, was it? This is about forcing people out to acquire their properties. Her smile tightened. "I'm simply offering a solution to your predicament. The offer expires tomorrow." She handed me a business card before walking away, leaving me homeless before my boarded-up house. That night, my neighbor Eduardo took me in. I sat at his kitchen table, a 45-year-old man suddenly homeless, no access to medications, clothes, or even my toothbrush. His wife Maria loaned me a set of her son's clothes and basic toiletries while Eduardo made calls to nearby veterans who might have prescription blood pressure medication to share until morning. Through his window, I could see the security guard pacing my front yard, flashlights sweeping across my boarded-up house in the gathering darkness. Monday morning found me in the offices of Sarah Hernandez, an attorney specializing in property rights. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she reviewed my documentation and photos. "They've crossed several legal lines, Mr. Jensen," she said, placing a yellow legal pad between us. "The problem is securing immediate relief. HOA disputes are notoriously complex and time-consuming. So they can just board up my house and that's it? I'm homeless until some distant court date." Sarah leaned forward. "Not if we can prove emergency circumstances. You mentioned medication inside. Blood pressure medication, my wife's ashes, irreplaceable family photos, literally everything I own." She nodded sharply and pressed her intercom. "Maria, contact Judge Watkins' clerk. We need an emergency hearing today if possible." Her assistant appeared moments later. "Judge Watkins is at a judicial conference until next week. Judge Harmon is covering emergencies." Sarah's expression darkened. "Harmon? Are you sure?" When her assistant left, I asked, "Is that a problem?" "Christopher Harmon was a real estate attorney before his appointment to the bench," she explained. "His former firm represented several development companies." She hesitated, "including Meridian Properties." My stomach dropped. "That can't be legal. Isn't that a conflict of interest?" "He should recuse himself, but that creates delays." She turned to her computer and pulled up a county planning map, overlaying it with my notes about violation patterns. "This is significant. These properties, when combined, create perfect frontage for a commercial development with highway access." Property records showed 6 homes had already been sold to shell companies all connected to Meridian Properties. Most telling was the discovery that Vanessa Mitchell had served as legal counsel for Meridian until 3 months before moving into the neighborhood and running for HOA president. "This isn't just about aesthetics," Sarah said grimly. "This is a systematic acquisition strategy using the HOA as a weapon." As we spoke, her phone rang. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a troubled expression. "Judge Harmon has a full docket and can't hear emergency motions until Thursday." "Thursday? I need my medication today. I'll get a court order for retrieval of essential items," she promised. "But Mr. Jensen, this is going to be a difficult fight. Meridian Properties has deep pockets and significant political connections." I left her office with a plan for medication retrieval, but the sobering knowledge that justice would be neither swift nor guaranteed. My teacher's salary had never allowed for substantial savings, and my pension suddenly seemed woefully inadequate against the legal machinery assembling against me. That afternoon, I visited Eduardo's mother Carmela, who had worked as a county clerk for 40 years. While searching through public records, she discovered something shocking. Meridian's development plan had already received preliminary approval months ago, contingent on property acquisition, before Vanessa was even elected HOA president. This isn't opportunistic, I realized. This is a coordinated campaign. I was sitting on Eduardo's porch that evening when a taxi pulled up. Out stepped my brother Mike, duffel bag over his shoulder, sunglasses hiding eyes that had seen more combat than most could imagine. At 42, he moved with the controlled efficiency that marked his quarter-century as a Navy SEAL. No wasted motion, constant awareness of his surroundings. "Bobby?" he called, confused to see me at the neighbor's house. Then his eyes locked on my boarded-up home across the street. "What the hell happened?" I explained everything as Mike listened in complete silence, his expression darkening with each detail. When I finished, he set his bag down with deliberate calm. "So let me get this straight," he said in the quiet voice I recognized from childhood as containing fury. "A homeowners association has illegally seized your property, is systematically forcing fixed-income residents out of their homes, and local authorities claim they can't intervene? That's about the size of it. Mike and I were always opposites. I taught history, he made it. While I used dialogue to resolve classroom disputes, he executed precision strikes against global threats." "You've documented everything?" he asked. "Every interaction, citation, and conversation, mapped across the entire neighborhood." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Still the methodical history teacher. His eyes narrowed, already formulating strategy. "Tell me about Vanessa Mitchell and her husband." "Everything." Over dinner at Eduardo's, I introduced Mike to neighbors who had also received violations. He listened more than he spoke, asking precise questions about timelines, specific wording of notices, and property locations. I recognized the expression in his eyes. He was formulating strategy. After dinner, he made a series of phone calls, speaking in the clipped language of military operations. When he finished, he turned to me. "I've got people coming. Former teammates who specialize in intelligence gathering, digital forensics, and public relations." "Mike, this isn't a military operation," I cautioned. "That's exactly what it is," he replied without hesitation. "You're facing an adversary with superior resources who's using asymmetric tactics against vulnerable civilians. My entire career was designed for precisely this scenario, just on different terrain." Later that night, he spread my documentation across Eduardo's dining table, analyzing patterns with the same intensity he'd once applied to mission planning. "This isn't random enforcement," he said, tracing the L-shaped pattern of violations. "This is a coordinated acquisition strategy with distinct phases." He pointed to properties already sold. These were Phase 1, soft targets offered buyouts that seemed generous but were well below market value. He indicated homes with the most violations. "Your Phase 2, resistant targets requiring pressure tactics. The remaining homes are mapped according to development priority." Mike pulled out his laptop. "Time to gather intelligence on our opposition." "What exactly does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Mike said as his fingers flew across the keyboard, "that before every operation, you identify the opposition's capabilities, motivations, and vulnerabilities. Vanessa and James Mitchell have digital footprints. So does Meridian Properties. So does every board member and shell company they've created." His eyes reflected the screen's blue light. "They think they're hunters. They don't realize they've become the hunted." In special operations, Mike explained while building comprehensive profiles of our opponents, intelligence drives action. We never operate without knowing our terrain. After 2 sleepless nights of digital excavation, hacking through corporate firewalls and calling in favors from contacts in banking regulation, he'd uncovered James Mitchell's blueprint, the same predatory pattern used in 3 other communities. Their playbook was consistent: install cooperative HOA leadership, create violation pressure, then acquire devalued properties. These weren't random tactics. This was corporate colonization. Court records, buried in obscure county archives and sealed by judicial order, revealed previous lawsuits all settled with non-disclosure agreements, effectively silencing former homeowners. The most damning evidence came from a financial whistleblower, documentation showing Vanessa had received consulting fees from Meridian while serving as HOA president. A smoking gun proving conflict of interest. This isn't just unethical, Mike said, sorting through printouts. It borders on criminal conspiracy and fraud. That afternoon, two men arrived whom Mike introduced simply as former colleagues. Carlos, a compact man with watchful eyes, specialized in digital intelligence. Richard, with his precise posture and scanning gaze, had expertise in what he called human intelligence gathering. "We need 3 types of evidence," Mike explained as they gathered around Eduardo's table. Financial connections between the HOA and Meridian, documented pattern of targeted enforcement, and proof of their ultimate development intentions. While Sarah pursued legal avenues, Mike coordinated what he called parallel information collection. Carlos established secure communications for residents to document HOA interactions. Richard began discreet background investigations on every board member. That evening, Mike and I walked the neighborhood, not a casual stroll, but what he termed a terrain assessment. He noted sight lines, property boundaries, and community gathering points. More importantly, he connected with neighbors, particularly fellow veterans. Harold was Army Rangers, Mike told me after speaking with a man 3 doors down. Marissa was Air Force Intelligence. Eduardo served with the Marines in Desert Storm. You've got an entire defense network already in place. By day 3, we had identified 17 veterans throughout Oak Ridge Estates. Each brought unique skills, from Harold's logistics experience to Marissa's analytical abilities. More importantly, they brought the quiet determination of those who had sworn to defend their country and now found that mission extending to their neighborhood. Carlos made a breakthrough in digital investigation. They got sloppy with their LLC registrations, he reported, showing us shell companies all leading back to James Mitchell. 6 properties already acquired, for through pressure tactics identical to what they're doing to you. Most significant was our discovery through Eduardo's college-age daughter Sophia. She recognized one of the compliance consultants from her urban planning class where he had guest lectured on community revitalization through strategic acquisition. Sophia helped us access the university's online repository of guest lectures. There, in high-definition video, was James Mitchell presenting Meridian's Oak Ridge opportunity 6 months earlier, complete with renderings showing our homes replaced by retail structures. "This is our smoking gun," Mike said. They planned this entire operation before installing Vanessa as their enforcement mechanism. In special operations, Mike told our growing coalition gathered in Eduardo's garage, "The advantage goes to those who seize the initiative." My personal battle transformed into a military-grade community defense. Harold's veterans established surveillance points throughout the neighborhood, 24-hour eyes on all HOA movements. Marissa, former Air Force Intelligence, created an encrypted documentation system categorizing every HOA interaction by severity and pattern. When an HOA security guard blocked Mike from photographing my boarded house, the confrontation revealed our advantage. "This is private property," the guard insisted, hand threatening on his radio. "Public sidewalk," Mike replied with the calm of someone who had faced actual threats. "State Statute 38.14 permits documentation of any property visible from public space." He gestured subtly to a neighbor filming from their porch. "Every interaction is documented for pending federal civil rights proceedings." The guard retreated, confusion evident. Mike just smiled. They only know how to intimidate isolated seniors. They have no playbook for coordinated resistance from combat veterans. The legal front progressed as well. Sarah filed our emergency injunction request, supported by affidavits from 17 neighbors documenting the pattern of targeted enforcement, alongside Meridian's own presentation showing their pre-existing development plans. The media strategy materialized when Mike contacted Jim Kozlowski at Channel 8 News. Jim had been embedded with Mike's SEAL team in Iraq and owed him for an incident neither would discuss. Jim reviewed our evidence, eyes widening at each document. "This isn't just neighbors fighting over fence heights. This is corporate predation using HOA bylaws as weapons. Thursday at 6, we expose everything. Vanessa's emergency meeting announcement came within hours. To address community concerns and misinformation. She's panicking, Mike said, organizing our evidence for maximum impact. In combat, your strongest position is when the enemy is forced to fight on your terms, your timeline. The day before the meeting brought unexpected support. Judge Sandra Reynolds, returning early from medical leave and taking over Judge Harmon's docket, reviewed our emergency petition. Unlike Harmon, Reynolds had no connections to development companies and immediately issued a temporary restraining order against the HOA. By noon, a court officer supervised the removal of boards from my front door, allowing me to retrieve essential items while the case proceeded. Inside my violated home, I discovered their fatal mistake. Abandoned in their haste to seal my house, a Meridian Properties clipboard containing not just a property assessment, but architectural renderings of a retail building superimposed over my home's exact location. The date stamp, 3 weeks before my first violation notice. Sarah's hands actually trembled as she examined it. This isn't just evidence, Robert, it's a smoking gun with fingerprints. They didn't just plan to take your home. They'd already designed what would replace it before issuing a single violation. That evening, Mike gathered our core team. Tomorrow's meeting is our D-Day, he said. Everyone knows their role. We present evidence methodically and comprehensively. This isn't about anger, it's about justice. The community center was packed Wednesday evening. Neighbors who hadn't attended meetings in years came out. Many wearing blue ribbons Herald had distributed as a silent symbol of solidarity. Television cameras from Channel 8 were positioned strategically. In the front row at our core team, Mike, myself, Sarah Hernandez, and Margaret Wilson, who had insisted on speaking despite her nervousness. Vanessa Mitchell entered with 2 board members and a man I recognized as her husband James. She appeared momentarily startled by the turnout and cameras but quickly composed herself. We've called this meeting to address some misconceptions about recent enforcement actions. She began with practiced confidence. The board is simply fulfilling its duty to maintain community standards as outlined in our covenant. Mike raised his hand immediately. When recognized, he stood. The room fell silent. I'm Commander Michael Jensen, retired. I've spent 25 years as a Navy SEAL, leading operations to protect American interests and values. His voice carried natural authority without raising volume. One of those fundamental values is that a person's home is their sanctuary, protected by law against unjust seizure. He gestured toward me. My brother Robert has lived here for 15 years. Contributing to this community as a teacher and neighbor. 6 days ago, his home was illegally boarded up while he was taking his grandson to a baseball game. Without raising his voice, Mike commanded complete attention. This was not an isolated incident or a misunderstanding of HOA regulations. This was part of a systematic campaign to force specific homeowners to sell their properties to Meridian Properties for a planned commercial development. James Mitchell stood abruptly. That's a defamatory accusation without foundation. Is it? Mike asked calmly. He nodded to Carlos, who activated a projector. On the wall appeared James Mitchell's university presentation, dated 6 months earlier, showing renderings of Oak Ridge Marketplace, occupying exactly the properties now receiving violations. This commercial development was planned before your wife was even a resident of this community, let alone HOA president. Mike continued as James Mitchell's face darkened. Let's be precise about the timeline. Mike played a recording from Mitchell's lecture. The acquisition strategy requires careful sequencing. Phase 1 targets involve creating cooperative community governance to facilitate remaining acquisitions. The room erupted. Vanessa tried to regain control. This meeting is not about my husband's business. It is precisely about that, Sarah interrupted, standing. I filed an emergency injunction with the county court, along with a formal complaint to the state attorney general's office regarding violation of fair housing laws, elder exploitation, and illegal seizure of property. She held up the clipboard discovered in my home. This property assessment for Robert Jensen's home, conducted by Meridian Properties 3 weeks before any violations were issued, demonstrates premeditated targeting. This isn't enforcement. It's corporate predation using HOA mechanisms as weapons. Jim Kozlowski stepped forward with a camera operator. Ms. Mitchell, would you care to comment on your previous employment with Meridian Properties and why you failed to disclose this relationship when running for HOA president? Vanessa gathered her papers hastily. This meeting is adjourned. Actually, Harold called out, according to HOA bylaws section 2, for a meeting can only be adjourned by majority vote once called to order. I hope that we continue. Seconded, came voices throughout the room. As Vanessa and James attempted to leave, Margaret Wilson rose shakily to her feet. Her voice, thin but determined, cut through the commotion. I've received 17 violations in 3 months after 0 violations in 40 years, she said, holding up her citation notices. My late husband's memorial garden was called a nuisance installation. The ramp for my sister's wheelchair was deemed architecturally inconsistent. Her voice strengthened. 2 days after I refused a below-market offer from a company I now know is connected to Meridian Properties, my home was declared a health hazard, requiring immediate remediation. She looked directly at Vanessa. I was ready to give up, to sell my home and memories because I couldn't fight anymore. But then I realized something. She gestured around the room. We aren't alone. We're a community. And communities stand together. The room erupted in applause. As Vanessa and James finally pushed toward the exit, Mike stepped into their path. The Attorney General's office has been fully briefed, he said quietly, as has the State Bar Association regarding ethical violations. I'd suggest you prepare accordingly. The confrontation at the HOA meeting triggered immediate consequences. By morning, the county judge had expanded our emergency injunction, preventing any HOA enforcement actions pending full investigation. All existing fines were suspended, and a court-appointed observer was assigned to monitor HOA activities. Channel 8's investigative report aired as planned, featuring interviews with affected residents and documentation connecting targeted HOA enforcement with Meridian's development plans. 2 additional news stations picked up the story within days. The State Attorney General's office announced a formal investigation into potential violations of fair housing laws, elder exploitation, and fraudulent HOA practices. The State Bar Association opened an ethics investigation into Vanessa Mitchell's undisclosed conflicts of interest. The following Tuesday, an emergency recall election removed Vanessa and 3 board members from HOA leadership. Harold was elected interim president. His first official act nullified all outstanding violations and commissioned an independent audit of HOA finances. Most satisfying was the letter from Meridian Properties announcing they were indefinitely suspending development activities in the Oak Ridge area due to community feedback and ongoing regulatory review. By Wednesday morning, a group of neighbors arrived at my house with tools and supplies. Mike had organized what he called a community restoration operation. Within hours, all traces of the boarding had been removed. Eduardo repaired damage to my door frames. Tom Richards fixed the broken porch railing. The transformation extended beyond physical repairs. The neighborhood itself seemed to awaken from long hibernation. People who had barely acknowledged each other for years were now exchanging phone numbers, sharing meals, and creating support networks. The Saturday after my home was restored, 28 neighbors gathered to help replant and expand Claire's wildlife garden. Margaret brought cuttings from her late husband's roses. Tom's daughter designed a small commemorative plaque honoring Claire's memory and environmental vision. Mike extended his visit, helping establish a neighborhood emergency response team composed primarily of veterans but open to all residents. Communities that know each other look out for each other, he explained during the first training session. The strongest defense against exploitation is connection. At the first meeting of the newly elected HOA board, Harold proposed a revised covenant focused on minimum safety standards rather than aesthetic control, with special provisions protecting accessibility modifications and environmentally beneficial landscaping. Our job isn't to make every house look identical, he declared to enthusiastic applause. It's to maintain a community where people can age in place with dignity, security, and mutual support. The measure passed unanimously. Perhaps most meaningful was the establishment of the Oak Ridge Community Preservation Fund, created to help residents with limited incomes make necessary home repairs and improvements. The initial donation came anonymously, though the amount, exactly matching the total of all fines collected under Vanessa's leadership, suggested the source. 8 months later, following an accelerated investigation due to public pressure and the evidence we'd compiled, the Attorney General's office announced settlements with Meridian Properties and former board members, including substantial financial penalties and permanent restrictions on their HOA participation. The funds were directed to the Community Preservation Fund, effectively returning the money to the community it was taken from. 6 months have passed since those dark days when I stood before my boarded-up home. My garden is thriving now, attracting the butterflies Claire loved and serving as a model for 7 similar gardens throughout the neighborhood. What happened here wasn't just about property values or landscaping choices. It was about the fundamental right to security in your own home and the power of the community to stand against injustice. Mike has moved on, though he returns monthly for our neighborhood veterans breakfasts. Before leaving, he helped establish a network connecting similar communities facing predatory development tactics. This pattern exists across the country, he told me. Corporate interests use bureaucracy as a weapon against the vulnerable. But now they're facing organized resistance from people who understand both the terrain and the stakes. What did I learn through all this? Although we often feel powerless against systems and money, we have strengths they can't anticipate. That the skills and wisdom of older Americans aren't outdated, they're essential. Those veterans who defended our nation abroad continue that mission in their own communities. And that sometimes the quietest people, teachers, nurses, retirees, can become the most powerful voices when united in purpose. If you're facing similar battles with overreaching authorities or corporate predators, remember this: document everything. Build alliances. Know your rights. Find strength in unlikely places. And remember that bringing injustice into the light is often the most powerful weapon available. They boarded up my house because they saw only a retired teacher who would quietly surrender. They didn't know my brother is a Navy SEAL. But their fatal miscalculation wasn't about Mike. It was failing to recognize that behind every door in Oak Ridge lived Americans who remembered what this country stands for. My wife's garden blooms again now, butterflies dancing where plywood once stood. Our community has never been stronger. Some battles aren't fought on foreign soil. The most important ones happen where we live, where we love, where we refuse to surrender. Those are the ones most worth winning, and the ones we cannot afford to lose.